Basically, we're here for Mike Morrison's 6-year post-tenure annual review. And got a little background review about Mike. He's our professor and Caesar Clayburgh Chair in Wildlife Ecology and Conservation. He got his BS at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff. He got his MS at Texas A&M University. He worked under the 3 S's. Slack was his main professor, Smines from at that time Marine Science, and some fellow named Sylvie was on his committee. He worked on all basis cormorants.
Now the Neotrophis cormorant. Yeah.
Okay,
Changed
yeah,
the name.
changed the name. They always do.
Ago, but yeah.
And his PhD at Oregon State University. After his PhD, he was hired on the faculty at UC Berkeley, where he was there for about 10 years. Then with the University of Arizona as an adjunct and at Cal State Sacramento adjunct professor. After a brief 2-year stint as a station manager for the University of California White Mountains Research Station, he got the current position he has now with A&M. Basically, he has emphasized through his career habitat relationships and behavior of birds and small mammals, including bats. He's a former editor of the Journal of Wildlife Management. Overall, through his career, he's had 70 master's, PhD, and postdocs. He's published 4 textbooks and over 225 journal articles. But most importantly, he tells me, his 12 years experience working at a pack station, that he can guide you through the backcountry and shoe horses. Okay? The title of his talk today is Investigating the Interactions, the Integrating Factors Linked to Species Persistence Across Space and Time.
Thank you very much.
Take it away, Mike.
Sylvia, I appreciate it. Yeah, so if this doesn't work out for me, I can go back to shoeing horses. So it's good to have a real skill. So first of all, I appreciate all of you coming. It gives you something to do this afternoon, I know. So I just wanted to get the mood in place by this slide here. Dr. Volker, who's not here now, the head of the P&T committee, wanted me to start at the beginning. This is me right here. Since Dr. Sylvie did such a good overview, we'll skip through the first 150 slides. And we'll just kind of get to this. So what I want to do today, since I've been here for about 11 years, and this is a 6-year review, from about 2010 on, the program I started when I got here, the main program I'm going to talk about it's still going on in some regard, but kind of winding down, and then several other programs or research projects have picked up. So I'm going to talk about what I've done, and then I'm going to answer the, well, that's great, what have you done for me lately question, and talk about what we're doing going forward, and kind of emphasize throughout it what I try to do in graduate programs, whether I was at Berkeley, University of Arizona, or where. And when I came here to interview for the job back in 2005, I talked about this little guy, the Sierra Nevada willow flycatcher, and I used it as an example of the research program I had there when I was at adjunct at Cal State Sacramento with the grad students alike, and what I would do here. I didn't know exactly what species I'd be working on and the like, but my point and what I emphasized at the time was I wanted to build a graduate program, master's, PhD students, of students that worked together, integrated their projects, helped each other, worked obviously here on private lands, worked with the funding agency closely, worked with the private landowners so they could learn how to, so the agency people and the private landowners so they could learn how to talk with both those groups, because you talk to both of those groups differently. Okay, same basic message, but you deliver it differently. So that was the point. And so, as Dr. Sylvie said, the overall scope of what I do is, I call it investigating and integrating factors linked to species persistence across space and time. Approach that through basic ecological and behavioral studies, and trying to tie that to survival and reproduction. So rather than in habitat studies, going out and saying, well, here's an animal, we'll draw a circle around it or something, grab some information and say, this is what it's like here. We're going to go farther than that and look at those kind of the mechanisms that are driving their survival, reproduction, and then ultimately what we want to do for conservation is persistence in time, and what management practices can we do to make that happen. And the application results, as I said, to restoration and management. So what happened with, so I try to approach things through collaboration. I've just said, through all these groups here, you can read, so I won't read them all through here, and try to integrate that all together. And when I came here, we were still working on this project in the Sierra Nevada. It was a 13-year project on the state endangered species, and it culminated in a monograph and a whole lot of publications from grad students like Mathewson and Laughlin and the like. So, and it's just interesting slide of what our results pushed towards was a lot of restoration of the high meadows in the Sierra Nevada. This picture up in the corner there is from the 30s, the Depression Make Work project. So one of the things they did was get able-bodied men to go out there and dig these trenches along the meadow there on the left so they could drain the meadow so it would be easier to construct roads and drive across to do the logging. And of course that had a lot of bad effects on the willow growth, and when you're named a willow flycatcher, you kind of want that. And so this is kind of an example of the same area where they're now using a lot of our results and hydrological results and the others too to restore these back to what they were. So when I got here, I looked for a program that I could develop that would bring in quite a bit of funding, and I really didn't care that much about the species. I had seen this one in the upper left, the golden cheek warbler, a federally endangered species that only breeds in the state of Texas, and then also the other endangered species, the black-cap vireo, another breeds outside of Texas, also endangered. I didn't know, I'd seen that when I was back here as a grad student. I never thought coming here per se I'd be working on that, but because of colleagues, Neil Wilkins and some others at Institute of Renewable Natural Resources, working together, I was able, with my bird experience, to get the endangered species permits we needed and the like, and started to build a research program around that, because this bird is through this, and I'll talk about it more in here, through the central part of Texas, the oak juniper woodlands, and so it runs into a lot of development pressures and things like that, so it's of high interest to the state and private people. So the way I've developed a research program, so what I want to emphasize here is, I don't want to go into extreme details on these projects per se. Well, they've all been published and things, or most of them are in the publishing pretty frequently. I want to talk about how I pull this all together. And so what we try to do is we have the same basic sampling methods for core components of a long-term study. Students then come in and say, all right, here's the contract, and I'll talk about that in a second. We got money from this agency to do some contract, like from Texas Department of Transportation. The Fish and Wildlife Service was interested in the impacts of road construction noise and activity on the golden cheek warbler, the nesting behavior and the like. So what we do is we bring the grad students in to work that part of the contract, but then because we have ample funds, you can fund the student, you can fund field techs, but then they can go through and say, you turn them loose and say, okay, look at this bird, look at this situation, the ecology. What needs to be done? What don't we know about this? And then they can look through that and say, all right, here's a neat thing to pick out. I'm going to study that for my thesis or my dissertation. So while they're doing the contract work, doing that great stuff of hiring the field techs, training them and doing all that, then they can also be more inquisitive and pick out a project that they can work on that's related to it. And the agencies are good at supporting that because they know what their graduate students. Okay, you can just see what, regular group meetings, work together. When you're done with your field work, you get to go over there and help the other grad student do their field work and learn. And so that requires funding from a lot of different sources. So as I said, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, they were interested in just the distribution and abundance of this bird. Department of Defense, specific impacts of troop activities and thinning. We looked at the impacts of explosions, things like that, understory thinning so troops could move through and the like on the birds through various automated devices, which I'll talk about in a second. TxDOT I already talked about. Fish and Wildlife Service was interested in recovery plan because the species is listed as endangered. How can we recover this thing off the endangered species list? And so graduate education is the important thing. I already talked about what they do. They manage the projects, select and train the field assistants, and the like. And a whole lot of them, like I always tell them that their primary goal in life is to keep my career afloat. And so you have to pick really high quality students, okay? So I'm pretty good at that. And then, so teamwork's important, and this is me here. So teamwork is why you just sit back and strategize, and you have them all go out there. So, but teamwork's really important, and that's, I think, kind of a hallmark of what I do, is to make sure they do work together and support each other. They are adults, they know how to manage themselves, they need guidance, not micromanagement. So in this project, just to give you an example of what we did, is, for example, one dissertation project was on conspecific attraction. I know what conspecific attraction is in birds. I had no particular idea of studying them in the golden-cheeked warbler, but one of my PhD students, Shannon Farrell, who is now an assistant professor in the environmental program, forestry program at SUNY, came up with this idea of conspecific attraction, where my main role in there, besides encouraging her and the like, was to work with the Fish and Wildlife Service on the endangered species permit. Because what she did, I'm not going to go through each individual one of these, but what she did was really insightful, and she did experimental manipulation of the birds through their calls. So when they came in the spring migrating in, she had sound playbacks set up. So the birds thought that this was where the other birds were. And so we had pre-treatment data before she did that, after treatment, to see were the birds, because people at the time had said this is what good airfinger's quote habitat was for these birds. But we had some indication that, we see them in other places too that they're not supposed to be, and they seem to be breeding okay. So she said, well, let's see if we can manipulate this. So she drew them into areas that were not supposed to be as good. Okay? And then in the areas that were good, she was able to pull them in and concentrate them and increase their density in those areas. Okay? And we found out that the birds could do quite well in these areas that were airfinger's quote low quality. Right? Now in a drought year or something, maybe they wouldn't do quite as well there. But she showed that what we knew, people thought they knew about the habitat of this bird, which is real important, it's endangered species, how much of it's out there. And I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail here as an example. She showed that, well, you know what? There's a lot more of it out there than they can occupy. There's a lot more where those birds can spread out if they wanted to. So it really changed the way we look at what is habitat of this species. Other student decided, well, fire ants to look at. Ecology of the birds at the edge of their range. Everyone, and I'll show you on a map here in a second, had been studying the golden-cheeked warbler around Fort Hood, because they had to fund it because it's Fort Hood and they have to manage endangered species, and also around the city of Austin. Some of you have probably been on the Laconia's Canyonland National Wildlife Refuge. Okay? That's an area that's used for mitigation for the golden-cheeked warbler. So when a developer wants to develop some area, they have to go find a willing landowner and buy their property and set it aside for the bird. But that's where all the work was done. And some of the other things that we did here. So there was all these individual projects that I didn't have any particular notion that that's what I wanted to do. My role was to sit back and strategize and find the funding and then guide them. And then these students came up with these ideas and pursued them. And we were able to, now I'll show you, this mark up here, the black and the, that's primarily the breeding range of the golden-cheeked warbler in Texas, the only place they breed in the world. So what we did is these little birds here, we established study areas, study kind of focus areas in these locations, usually state properties because you can have easy places to stay, and then spread out from there working on private properties. So we were able to spread across the entire range. So we're looking at kind of spatially, in the sense that, all right, we were interested in what's going on over the whole range. How much area out there can they occupy? What's their abundance? And then drilling right down into things like conspecific attraction, parasitism, nest predators, and the like. So we bored down into that. Same with the black-capped vireo. Now it breeds down into Mexico and a little bit up in Oklahoma. It used to go a lot farther north into Kansas. But this is just to show you an idea of the fact that we worked pretty much across every place the bird occurred in the state. And then, again, focused down on individual species projects. So one graduate student who was managing actually the golden-cheeked warbler project in the central part of the range on the highway noise and impact study, he decided he wanted to work in the black-capped vireo for his master's. So he was able to do that because he could use those field technicians part-time to do that. So he could even switch species. And what's neat too, we were able to, and one of the students that, she's going to graduate pretty quick, Helen Davis. This is not from her study, but we were able to purchase about 50 or 60 infrared nest cameras, because with birds, we know that nest predation is the largest factor responsible for nest loss. But it's hard to tell. You come up, well, yep, there's nothing in the nest. What killed it? So you need nest cameras. And so we were able to look, and some of the things we found were pretty interesting on predators that people had no idea of. So we were able to, students were able to burrow in on this, and we have. Wasn't going to try and risk the fates of the PowerPoint gods and try to have a video and stuff, and it would mess up and it would ruin the whole thing. Because some of these videos, because these are videos, these are not individual pictures, these are running 24/7 infrared videos. But you have something like here, like a ringtail who comes up here, the nest is right here. You know, it's only about this big, it's at night. He goes, well, you know, what you can't see here is if he jumps here and misses, he's dead, because he's going over the cliff. So he finally gets himself over here, he's looking for it, and he finally leaps and grabs it. Now, we had some of them are pretty, it's not funny for the video, because it always ends badly, but it is kind of interesting to watch. So it was really insightful, because the students, I mean, this is why I sit back and strategize, because this is literally thousands of hours of video you go through. So it's a lot of work. And here, you know, data like this, just to show you for the BCVI's Black Cat Vireo, where we studied in a lot of different areas. Devil's River down the south part of the range, all the way up to Gatesville, which is Fort Hood, and the like, and other places. So we can get not only a broad idea of what's going on with the species, but then individual students, say, might be doing their master's or PhD work at Fort Hood, at Devil's River, at Balcones, something like that, doing one of those individual projects we talked about. So we're able to gather through this period of time an incredible amount of information, more information by far that's ever been collected on these birds, and really changed the way people look at where they are and what they do. Also working with one of my colleagues, Joe Suzak, he's a professor at Humboldt State, if you work with bats, you know about the software Sonobat. Well, I knew Joe Suzak before there was Sonobat, but over 20-some years working with him. But he adapted it or changed it for bird calls also. He calls it Sonobird, it's not commercialized. But we were able to go through with the black cap, with the golden-cheeked warbler here, and when we were looking at this impact of highway noise and construction, one of the ideas there is that the birds are going to sing higher frequency and louder because of that noise. And that could cause some kind of physiological problems, it could cause some behavioral problems and nesting problems and the like. So we use automated recorders to record them, and then fortunately we have this automated software, because in the past you'd have to go through, because this is one golden-cheeked warbler song, phrase right there. You'd have to go through them by hand and measure these things. Fortunately, the computer, what it's doing, it's measuring 50-some odd variables on this. So you compare, pre-treatment, no noise, control, post-treatment, that sort of thing, and see of what was going on with that. While at the same time, we're looking at breeding success and behavior. And by the way, we found out that road construction noise and activity doesn't bother the birds one bit. Okay? And they really don't change their singing behavior. They just don't seem to care. This species does. In other environments, it does bother birds. In these, it does. It doesn't. Which is insightful, because the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the time was requiring mitigation because they just assumed noise bothered them, and they came up, based on literature from other species, a certain buffer area that was causing the Texas Department of Transportation to spend a lot of money on mitigation. Well, now the TxDOT doesn't have to spend your tax dollars on mitigation for that, because we've shown that it doesn't impact them not only in their behavior, but in their breeding success and where they nest too. So, some things where we're working right there with the state agency, the federal government, trying to come up with things that have a pretty broad impact. So one of the things we did, which is being used widely for the golden-cheeked warbler, is what people have done in the past is they use Landsat to model birds' habitat, and they did that in a static way. They said, okay, we're confident based on our information that we can go in and look at pixels of the imagery and say this is, and put in some categories. This is poor habitat, fair habitat, good habitat, excellent habitat. And so therefore there's this many thousands of hectares of this and that out there. And those things existed. But we looked at it and said, well, that's static, and it's not based on anything but your assumption of what's going on. So what we did, and through the funding of several agencies, including TxDOT, because what TxDOT wanted is a way to forecast what was going to happen in the future. Where should we put roads? The electric utilities want to know where should we put transmission lines. As you know, a lot of transmission lines are coming in from all those wind turbines out in West Texas. That's not the power isn't for there. It's for Houston, Dallas, San Antonio. So they got to get them there. So where do we put our transmission lines? So we wanted to come up with something, a model that was flexible and was based on data from what the birds were doing. We wanted the birds to tell us what was going on. So because mostly what people would do is go through and just look at this, classify it, and come up with patches of habitat. They're usually separated by public roads and paved roads and things like that, which is fine, but that's what they came up with. So what we did is we went out and we covered the entire range of the golden-cheeked warbler. Right? We and all these and these represent these just represent places we sampled. So it's not like there's one point that there's multiple points there. That's just the locations we sampled throughout their range, detections and non-detections. And one thing you'll notice is often, and I'll point it out in a minute, a lot of detections down here, which has some relevance. I'll bring back here in a second. So what we did for an occupancy model is that we went through and we looked at, it turned out through analyses, the size of the patch, okay, the location in the range, so those two things, where the patches are, or the size of the patch, but then also patches down here in this part of the range of the same size had more value, if you will, more occupancy than up in the higher part of the range. And what was really intriguing about this and which really helped, because a lot of people, we all know about habitat fragmentation and the like, what was interesting is landscape composition meant a lot. And look at these examples here. And it makes intuitive sense, but no one had looked at it this way before. So in those previous models, an equivalent patch, it meant the same. So whether or not it was located out here or right here, the same size meant the same. But if you look here, and this is occupancy, if you take a patch and isolate it out here, it's got an occupancy probably of about 8%. If you take a pretty much similar sized patch, but put it adjacent to another patch or closer to bigger patches, the occupancy goes up to about 25%. And if you put one in down in here that's surrounded by a lot of them, or it's isolated, it goes up to about 40%. So the point was that meant a lot. Where is the patch? And of course that has great relevance for management conservation of what size patches you need. And at the same time when we're doing this, we had a couple of graduate students, one working PhD student in more rural areas, and another one who finished more recently working around urban areas, is to look at, okay, what are the birds also doing in those patches? Okay, they're there, that's fine. How many are there? Are they breeding? Are they pairing successfully? And if they're pairing successfully, are they having nests? And if they're nesting, are the young coming off the nest? Okay. So, but those were the three. So at the same time this was going on, we were also then having students looking at individual patches at a finer or more close spatial scale. So when you develop the occupancy model, you come up with these probability predictions of occupancy, where the red here is really good and the green's not very good. And you notice what I pointed out before, look where all the red is. Look at the highest occupancy down here. Now these two X's, so you probably know what these are. This is up, this right in here, that's Fort Hood, and this is Balcones right here. That's where about 90-some-odd% of all the work on the golden-cheeked warbler was done before we did this work. And the Fish and Wildlife Service, before we started, their estimate of the abundance of this bird was based primarily on the fact that you read about that, well, these birds only occur in these areas. Okay? But when you go look, because this is primarily down there is what? It's private land. Okay? And it takes a bunch of Aggies to go down there and knock on a lot of doors. It's really difficult when you identified this patch, because we stratified, random, sampled, and all that good stuff, that you need to go to that patch. Who owns that patch? Right? Well, you have to go to the county records. And unfortunately in Texas there's 256 counties. It's a big drawback. So you have to go to the county records. Some county records are digitized, some of them, they have a big book. So why sit back and strategize? The students go there, open the big book and look down, compare maps, compare the scales often. Here's our GIS, and here's their map you have to measure. There's the patch. That patch belongs to so-and-so. And then you go find and call Mr. So-and-so and see if he will let you on his property. Now, we had great success because the Fish and Wildlife Service, after they had their arms twisted a little bit by people with a lot higher pay grade than me, decided that they didn't have to, because with endangered species, you're supposed to tell the Fish and Wildlife Service where you see each one. That's based on kind of the idea that, well, they're really rare and not many places, and we want to know where they are. It makes sense. But these birds aren't very rare, and they're all over the place. And if you want to get access to a person's private land, when you do walk up and say, yeah, first person I'm going to tell is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the federal government, where your endangered species are. That doesn't work. So the service recognized that and said, okay, just report it to us in a much broader scale. So and we wrote confidentiality agreements with them so they know that we will never tell the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that those birds were found on their property. Not like the service is going to go out there and knock on their door and do anything, but that is the fear. But we were fabulously successful in doing that. But you can see how different things are. And that changed, I mean, from the estimates of maybe 25,000 singing males, there's actually more like 200, 250,000 singing males in the state of Texas, which kind of changes your management perspective of these birds. So here's a model utility, and people are using this. It's readily available. We allow people to use this. Utilities are using it. TxDOT, Fish and Wildlife Service are using it for planning. And this is an example of how it can be used if someone is the utility, and here it is a utility. The example of how they can use that, cutting through, is so you can come up and say, okay, we've got, and they come up with a lot more plans to this. But let's say these are 2 transmission line corridors, and they usually just decide those based on proximity to habitable structures. People, you can't have the transmission lines too close to people and the like. And other things too, how expensive it's going to be to put in there, how many stream crossings, those sort of things. But endangered species habitat matters too. So if they come up with these, what they're going to be doing, of course, when you look at a closer scale, is they're going to be cutting things. So these patches are being cut. And you look down here, look where it isolates right there. Okay? And now all of a sudden this really nice patch becomes this patch. And look at that right there. So, you can get pretty, and of course these are just predictions. It's based on real data, but they're just predictions, so it's just a model. But still, for planning a transmission line or a road, this is what you need so you don't go too far down the road with it, literally. And what you end up with is something like this, where you can look at and see the change in hectares based on that northern route versus the southern route. And you look at a situation like this, it's where you're losing on the northern route an awful lot of the really big patches. That might not be too bad because, look, you're gaining a lot of patches that still have high occupancy, okay, because you're cutting some up, right? So you have to, there's various different ways, scenarios to look at that. So there's often not a clear-cut idea of which one is best, but you can look at that and say, oh, okay, overall, looks like that south route is not going to change much. But then you have to do the math and add up and decide which one you want. But the point is you can then manipulate that. What happens if we move this transmission corridor over a little bit? How does this change? So it's a real fluid thing, and you can sit there and do that. And then, of course, you need to go out there and ground truth it and make sure that that's really what is happening there. But it gives them a great planning tool. And it's used pretty much all the time now. Okay, so when you're the only one we need here in Narcissus, what I want to do, since this is the 6-year review, so that's kind of where we're at. That program is, we still are doing some work on some of the military bases on this, but honestly, we've kind of talked ourselves out of more funding, because while some people don't like the fact that there's so many golden cheek warblers, because it's a really good thing to stop projects with, the agencies realize that the bird is not in dire, it's not in dire throes right now of extinction. So it's one that they can kind of not worry as quite much about now. So the funding for that's kind of gone down. So what I want to do, since the 6-year review, I want to just go through a few numbers. Dr. Sylvie did a nice overview of what I've done to overall, but I just want to go through a couple things that we've done, and then I want to talk about what we're doing now. Okay? So just, things like this, total funding. This is all from 2010. How much, funding that we've been able to bring in, which is support this kind of thing, and a lot of grad students. It takes a bit of money. As Dr. Sylvie mentioned, been editor of Journal of Wildlife Management. I'm associate editor right now, Western North American Naturalist. I was an associate editor of Journal of Wildlife Management like forever, and I'm not doing that anymore, except just on special occasions. During this time period, we've published, 2 books are out. One is an edited volume. This one that Dr. Lopez would lead on, one of his former PhD students, which I know a lot of you know, Israel Parker, just came out from A&M Press, Applied Wildlife Habitat Management, and one that it's in production right now. Because of my association with Johns Hopkins here, they asked me to put together an ornithology text. Hopkins publishes Feldhammer's mammalogy book, and they want a kind of a companion ornithology textbook. And so the first thing I did, since I want to share pain, when they asked me to do that, is I went and got Dr. Volker involved because I didn't want him to escape that. But it's got 31 chapters. We've got authors from six countries, and it's going to be a pretty major work. It's going to be out next year, so it'll be an ornithology textbook, which has been a pretty large project to pull together. During this time period, I've had 19 master's students, 11 PhDs, and postdocs. I put IRNR there because they're usually associated with IRNR. And classes I teach, I've been teaching ornithology annually since the fall. When I came here, I designed 2 new courses, Animal Restoration, which is a stacked course, which I'm teaching right now, 419 and 619. I think we usually have about 20 to 25 undergrads in it every year. Wildlife Study Design, grad class. And then I've been in charge of our part of RENR 215 for a number of years, and we've finally pulling together a revision of the lab manual they use. We just met with Kendall Hunt yesterday to finalize that up. So one of my PhD students, Rachel Fern, has been the one that's been kind of leading, pulling that effort together. She'll be a co-author on the revision of that too. That's with Dr. Wu and Smines and Slack and Dr. West and ESSM, and then myself. So that's been a project to pull together going forward in 215. And during this period of 6 years, we've had 54 peer-reviewed journal articles, and the proudest thing about this is that 41 of them are my graduate students and senior authors. So to me, that's my measure of success, and I think that's because I always tell them whether or not you're at the if you're at the master's, you need to prepare yourself to be a PhD student if you're going to, and if nothing else, now as you guys know, whether it's a consulting firm or state agency, they want you to be able to publicly speak, they want you to be able to write. And the best way to show them that is that you've been at every Texas chapter meeting and various other mammal and bird meetings giving talks, and you've actually published in scientific literature. And that's something I emphasize for undergrads too, is that the actual critical review of undergraduate, of peer-reviewed literature, because no matter what you do, you're going to be evaluating that literature, rather than just summarizing it, which any student can do, but to actually try and critically evaluate that. And to me, I do that in every class. Ornithology, they have to pick out an ornithological thing, a little summary of it, and then tell me what's right and what's wrong with it. And it's fascinating how much they do find wrong with them. So, and then of course the grad students do that too. And we've had a good spread of journals, and this is due to the students being really good and insightful, from the management journals to Ecology and Evolution, Diversity and Distribution, Journal of Animal Ecology, of course the bird journals, and then the natural history journals. So when one of the students found in the camera that this katydid, which is about that long, I forget what they call the thing, that big, saw it in the camera coming in at night, chased the female black-capped vireo off the nest, grabbed one of the young vireos and tumbled out of the nest and proceeded to consume it. That was a new one. So, American Midland Naturalist, there's a note in there about this giant katydid doing that. And then we saw it again in another video too, so it wasn't a one-off thing. So, don't be a nesting bird in your next life. Everything wants to get you. So I want to talk about the future. I just like to put some inspirational slide up here for you. The future, just like the past, except you die there. So I just want to give you something to feel good about as we go forward. Okay, and that's for you, Dr. Grant. So yeah, so I just thought that was just wonderful. So as time allows, I'll go through this. Going forward, I'm easy. I don't worry too much about where I get the money from. As long as they're reputable and ethical. And so as the Warbler work has died down, serendipity hit for me, because when Dr. Wilkins went to run the East Foundation, he wanted to establish and implement a long-term monitoring program. He asked me to be involved with it, and I'm a co-PI on that with Dr. Lenny Brennan down in Kingsville. Because I've been doing bat work, although I'm an avian ecologist I've done a lot of rodent work and a lot of bat work. Thanks to Dr. Suzak 20-some years ago got me into it. I did have bat experience, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this study here about bats and white nose syndrome, and then a species I've been putting a lot of my personal effort into, Townsend's big-eared bat in California. So I just want to run through these. I don't know how far I'll get in this one. I don't want to, you guys got other things to do. But funding-wise, you can see we're keeping it really diverse. We're doing part of the work out in California is funded by the National Park Service, the Mojave National Preserve, which is most of the Mojave Desert. We're helping them with their bat management. The East Foundation, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Townsend's big-eared bat. Our work on the Warbler and the vireo continues with Army Corps of Engineers. Texas Department of Wildlife has funded the bat work, which I'll talk about, and of course TxDOT continues. So it's, again, it's a diversity of things. Well, I've kept, I think, my focus on, again, how do we describe what these animals are doing, and how do we determine how they can persist through time. Okay, that usually takes, as you guys know, focus studies, but also the broad, too. The broad, too, and then having the students focus in on those. So East Foundation, if you've been down there, they've got a lot of land. San Antonio Viejo, El Saos are two that we worked on. We have a postdocs and grad students. We're looking at small mammals, birds, raptors, amphibians, reptiles, bats, the vegetation, and graduate thesis projects. And the goal of the work isn't just to go down there and describe ecology. Okay? What the goal is to establish for them a long-term monitoring program. Well, to do that, you have to know, for all these groups, what techniques to use, how intensively those techniques have to be applied, and then for how long do you need to do those techniques to be able to say with confidence how much change is going on through time. Okay, you have to be able to do that. You can't, you shouldn't, like most people do, just go, and they knew this, go out there and say, all right, we're just going to put some grids out there, we're going to put some point counts and count and see what happens through time. Well, if you're willing to wait, like the breeding bird surveys that the USGS does, maybe 20 years, that's fine, and that's good. It's citizen science, it's wonderful. But if you're managing property and you need to know quicker impacts, you have to be a little bit more intense about it. So this is just an example. They have this is their San Antonio Viejo property, main property. Up here is these pastures called Los Coloraditos. It's about 12,000 acres there. They've divided that into a couple thousand acre pastures where they are doing various rotations of the cows. So they're trying to look and see what rotation works best, a continuous rotation, different kind of on and off rotations. And then they asked us to develop a plan to be able to tell how the wildlife responded to that. Dr. Brennan is taking the lead on some really intensive work up there on northern bobwhites. And then we have other locations spread out over all the sites and also El Saos. And the point of this is, of course, we'll end up with a tremendous amount of great information on the ecology of all these animals. But the main thing we're doing is this, and this is just an example. And this is for the Hispid cotton rat. We have it for all the species. We've got this in the draft manuscript right now. Our postdoc down there, Jeremy Bumgarn, is leading this. So for example, what you come up with are things like this. So this is the number of trapping grids down here, and this is the effect size. In other words, what % annual change do you want to see? Okay? And do you want to see that within 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years? And that's going to vary by species, by management objectives. So if you're interested on the experimental pastures, you might be interested in, well, pretty quick turnaround, time change. If it's just over the whole area and it's a cotton rat, you might only care every 10 years. Okay? So what it shows you here is, well, if you trap something like only 10 grids, within 3 years, you're only going to be able to see about an 18% annual effect size. So in other words, within 3 years, you'll only know that it was changing by 18% every year. So it takes you, you won't see that, it takes you 3 years to know it was changing that much. Okay? But if you want to do it a little bit more refined, then you got to get, for 3 years, you got to get out here and see it kind of plateaus. You got to get out here in the 30 or 35 number of trapping grids. Okay? And we also looked at size of trapping grids too, and what those effects are. I'm not going to go into that. I'm just giving you an example of the kind of thing we're doing. So, and this kind of falls into my background on study design and sample size analysis and things like that. And I don't know if this will show up. Yeah, it shows up pretty well. And you can look at it this way too. So what's the power to detect abundance and trend in them? If you want to see a 1% annual change, well, it's going to take, and this, what's great about this is people want to monitor. Everyone wants to monitor. Every agency wants to monitor. They all say monitor, 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 right? But then you show them something like this, and they go, ruh-roh, because all of a sudden they find out that we want to do it rigorously and statistically appropriately. Everybody says that, right? Well, then you explain power and all that to them, and they're usually smart people, they understand it. And then you show them, well, if you really want a 1% annual change, and I don't know why you'd want a 1% annual change in cotton rats, but if you did, this is just an example. At 10 years, you have to go 40 traps for 10 years to reach 90% power. Okay, well, you probably don't want that then, right? So, on the other hand, if you only care about 20% annual change, anything, just about anything will do it. So usually you're in more of this middle ground where 5% or 10%, and you can show it to them, well, look here, in 5 years, if you want a 90% power for a 5% annual change, the number of trapping grids that you need. So what's nice about this, we can lay out for them and say, because usually, as you guys know, agencies, other people want to know, tell us what we need to know. But we can't tell them, but we can help guide them through stuff like that. So that's the kind of work we're doing there. And of course, there'll be a lot of other ancillary information. The other thing that we were asked to do last year, you probably all know about the issue of white nose syndrome in bats. There's a fungus, Pseudogymerascus destructans, that was introduced in the United States probably 10, 12 years ago. They're not sure. It's been working its way west from the East Coast. And what happens is that it affects hibernating bats. Hibernating bats that go into deep hibernation. Now, during hibernation, bats will arouse from hibernation every few weeks because they have to urinate and maybe move around. The temperature changes in the whatever substrate, cave, mine, whatever they're in, and they move around. So they're used to these arousals. But the ones in the really deep hibernation, they can be in there for 2, 3, 4 months where they never eat. Okay? And so, and part of the problem with bats has always been, well, if you disturb them, they wake up too much, and they'll lose their body mass, and they won't make it through the winter. Well, what this fungus does when it gets on them, you can't see it. Okay? This is the syndrome that comes from it. You can't see it if it's on them. All right? But this results, and what it does, it gets into their skin, and it bothers them, and it wakes them up. Okay? And they can't sleep regularly. So they wake up too much or stay awake. They start, basically, white nose syndrome kills you by starving them to death. So there's a number of species that have died. I don't know if these numbers are right, but the government likes to throw out numbers like 6, 7 million bats have died overall from white nose syndrome. It's moving across the country. It's a lot. A lot of colonies, hibernacula, have been completely wiped out. And the bats have no defense. So Texas Parks and Wildlife, knowing it was moving this way, it was getting into Oklahoma, they funded us, starting last winter, to go out and do actually a statewide survey of bats to look at their distribution and then to look for the fungus. And by looking for the fungus, I'll show you in a second, you go in, basically you swab the substrate, put it in a little tube, you swab the bat, put it in a tube, send it off to the lab comes back and says positive or negative. And this is just an example of all the areas that we've sampled so far. A PhD student of mine, Melissa Meyerhofer, is leading this effort. You can see we've really, they're working now on new bat distribution records and everything like that, which is another nice ancillary kind of associated part of this. So what you do is you go out a lot of times in the winter, you get a cluster of bats like these, of tricolored bats in all sorts of different situations. You come up and swab them, try not to wake them up. They also will winter in man-made anthropogenic structures. These are all hibernating bats. They're all in a seam in a culvert. They're in here. I was told this is Krista Emery. She got her master's at San Angelo State, and she's working with us now. There's a couple of bats up here. I was going to make some quip about this is where I find my field assistants, but she probably wouldn't appreciate that. Very hard worker. And also in bridges. So TxDOT's been very cooperative with us in helping us find where these bats might be. And also some of the sites you can't really get into. They are too dangerous. We do use technical climbing stuff to get in, but sometimes we have to use acoustic detectors just to see if the bats are there. And you may have seen the news last week. The bad news is that we found the fungus for the first time in Texas in January and February in these counties up here in the Panhandle and out here, southeast of Lubbock, which is kind of a surprise. We kind of expected it. We would have found it more from here first, but we found it there. And so that's a big deal. It just means it's continuing to move. Usually, white nose shows up within 1 or 2 years after the fungus is first detected. And some of these sites were being monitored. The highest one up there, I think it's the top red box, was being monitored by Bat Conservation International for multiple years. The rest of them we've just started monitoring. So they know that it just showed up in a site that they've been monitoring for multiple years. So it's not like it's been here and we didn't know it. maybe it was in some of these other sites the year before, we didn't know it, but we know that it's not at least been widespread. So the bad news there, it's there. Now, as the project continues, we'll continue to try and outline where the fungus is. There's no cure for that. You can't just go in there and blast a cave with something that'll kill all the fungus, because there goes the cave environment. You can't do that. There's nothing really to treat the bats. You can't go in and treat them like oil-spilled birds and clean each individual one. So right now, it's really, no one has an idea of how they might stop or slow this up. But anyway, that's one project we're doing right now. What's neat about that, again, here's a grad student doing you saw those points, doing a massive statewide project, but now she's focusing down, her dissertation will be not only on she'll have the distribution data, occupancy model, and also where the fungus and probably white nose shows up, but then also all these extra things like distribution records, and they're getting a lot of new distribution records. It's really interesting. So the other thing I want to talk about, I probably won't get through all of them because I want to keep you beyond, is one of the projects I've been working on this bat. It's only a 10-gram bat, and you can see where it gets its name from, big-eared bat. They're moth specialists. They're very maneuverable. I've been working on them for about 20 years, just in California, in the eastern California Inner White Mountains, but got really intensive with them about 4 years ago, and then serendipity hit again because they got petitioned for listing it as a state endangered species in California, so the California Fish and Wildlife stepped up and gave us funding, myself and then Joe Suzak as a collaborator at Humboldt State, to say, okay, what's the distribution of these bats in the state, compare all the historic records of them, and at the same time, continue what you're doing on a more intensive study. I want to talk a little bit about a more intensive study, but this is the left coast here, California. This is Inyo County right here. Las Vegas is down here, Reno up here. Pretty big in California. I mean, I don't know, you probably put about 20 Texas counties in that place. It's big. And so what we've been doing for the last 3 years statewide, revisiting all historic breeding and wintering sites in the entire state. I've collected about half the data. I've been responsible for the southern half of the state, the deserts, while colleague Joe Suzak and another one, Layla Harris, she's a PhD student now at UC Davis, have been responsible for more of the north, although I've been there. So locate all those, and they're widely distributed back. Locate previously unreported sites, develop an occupancy model, and make recommendations. And this bat is an elevational migrant. Okay, and I'll show you here. I'll talk about the regional site. It winters, it breeds at low elevations, and then primarily migrates elevationally into mines, natural caves and the like, to winter, where it's cold, because hibernators need the temperature just above freezing to help them kind of like their little bag of cold water there, so they don't have to utilize anything. So the regional study in the Inyo and White Mountains and the adjacent Sierra, some pretty simple questions. Do bats that breed together winter together? Okay, what is the extent of juvenile dispersal? What's the genetic characterization of bats? I'll talk about, Dr. Light has been doing those analyses, so I've been collaborating with her. What's survival based on age and location, and what management practices can you use to enhance long-term persistence? And this is that red area, the Inyo White Mountains. This is an area, the study area is about from here to up, right into here, and across the two ranges. It's an area of about 150 miles north to south. And this kind of gives you, this is the kind of the entry to the southern end. If you're staying here looking at it, you go to the right, Death Valley is about 30, 40 miles away. And you can see the nearest town is 100 miles from there. It's all dirt road. And then the study area on another dirt road continues for about another 50 miles. So it's a very remote area. Townsend's bigger bet, there's about 75, 80 bats here. That's a breeding cluster. They get together on the surface. They're a caviniferous rooster, so they're exposed like this. When they have their young, they have one young a year. They leave them there when they go out at night, so they're all hunkered. The bats are all hunkered together so they can thermoregulate. Okay, so that's what they do in the summer. So it's great. The whole maternity colony is there. It's great. They're all together. However, what they do in the winter, we answer the question really quick. So what I've been doing is I've been pit tagging them since 2013. We've pit tagged close to 900 of them. I think I've accounted for about 95% of the pit tagging. So if you need pit tagging done, let me know. What they do, and you notice their ears are gone. They tuck their ears, pretty cute, underneath their wings. during hibernation to avoid heat loss. If it gets too hot, it's great when you see a cluster of them. In the middle, there might be a bat sitting there with a couple of ears out because it's too warm. It's pretty interesting to see. So that's what they do in the winter. There's sometimes groups. So in the summer, they're down here at about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 feet. That's the Sierra Nevada in the background. Down where it's 80, 90, 100, 115 degrees. In the winter, they go elevationally up where it's just above freezing, like here. And what we do is we go into mostly, unlike Texas, most of this area, of course, mining is really big in California. So there's in the Inner White Mountains, there's a lot more mines. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of mines than there are natural caves. That's me this winter. And it's not bad. You can tell because when you go in and you see this, it's really cool because here's the support and it's not cracking. But when you see this, you get a little worried because that means the weight is coming down on it. But I've been underground for just thousands of mines. It's really fascinating when you go into these abandoned mines. This is down here, but there's lava there. This is a opening to a natural lava tube, and they do nest in there. Roost. That's Layla Harris in there looking. There's also some pretty major natural caves. I'm just showing that I still have my rock climbing skills. We had to rappel down about 40 feet, and unfortunately, since the person I was with, Joe Suzak, forgot the ascenders, we had to free climb it back out, but I made him go first so he would repel me. So he's younger than me. But that was quite a free climb, let me tell you. So it's a pretty neat caves you can get into. And they also go into these little grottos. There's a light right there. That's only about 3 meters deep, and that's about 5 meters deep. And what we found so far is that bats that breed together do not winter together mostly. These little guys scatter everywhere. And what you'll find like there was one bat right up in here. Some of the places you'll go, there'll be 5 or 10. Most maybe have 20 or 30. And what you'll find in a hibernacula, you'll find bats from multiple maternity colonies, okay, which is interesting. So they breed together, then they scatter. And we capture them in various ways. This is a harp trap. The bats hit the monofilament vertical line and fall into the bag. We then take them out, and we pit tag them with a 9mm biomark pit tag. And then we took genetic samples. And it's just taking a sample. And we've got, just to give you an idea of how many places here, this is that study area I showed before. These are all maternity colonies. And this is on the east side of the range. These are through the valley on the west side. This is the Sierra Nevada right there. And so what we're doing is we're tagging in all these sites. And then in the winter, you basically have to cover this whole area, including a lot of overnight in the winter backpacks and things up to some of the higher elevation caves and mines, to go scan and see if the bats are there. Fortunately, they don't get themselves into cracks, so you can see them pretty readily. And this is my able assistant. It's our 12-year-old daughter. This is a pass-through antenna. It's about like this. So you cover the portal, and so that's a maternity colony. So when the bats fly out, it's recorded on this machine right here. So we have information, we'll have information on longevity and site fidelity. And what's interesting so far is that we've now gotten 2 confirmed cases of females, juveniles, first-year females in the winter, physically dispersing to another colony. So that'll be a really neat supplement to the genetics work that Dr. Light is leading. So we'll have not only the genetic diversity work, we'll also have the physical dispersal work. And this is continuing. That's just how it's set in a natural cave. And we get things like this. They breed down here, and they go up here to winter. So that's kind of the extreme, but you can see there's about 37 kilometers. Sometimes they go right up the hill 4 or 5 kilometers. Sometimes they go 40 kilometers. And what you'll get from maternity, a couple will go over here, a few will go over here, some will go up here. If I did the whole thing, it'd look like that. Okay? You can think about some evolutionary ideas. Well, probably in the breeding season, you're awake, and you're right. There's a reason to be together because your young have to be warm. They can't thermoregulate for a while, so they got to be together. Okay, so that maybe kind of makes sense. And the female can carry their young. Okay, and then the young normally can fly within about 3 weeks, so they can get out of there. In the winter, you're asleep. All right, so it kind of makes sense. If all of the maternity colony were in the same hibernacula, what would happen if someone disturbed you? If the location, the cave or whatever collapsed in a really heavy snow year, what would happen? So at least in my simple way of looking at it, it makes sense that you would. Now, why they choose to go where they go, I don't know. But it's that's what they do. And so it leads to things like this. Some of the management applications, this is a back gate. You can, if you've been familiar with them, there's a lock up underneath here so you can gain access. So what we're helping them do is identify, besides all this neat ecological thing, they wanted to know if they bred together and then wintered together, are there certain hibernacula that they needed to protect more than others? Okay, we're finding out, no, they're everywhere. And by the way, unfortunately with these bats, they're scattering everywhere. They're going to, most of them, I can't find a lot of them, but they come back every year. We're pretty sure they're in those little grottos, and that whole mountain range, which is dolomite and limestone, it's riddled with them. And so basically to find them, it takes walking every freaking canyon out there to try and see where they are and scanning them. So they're not being very cooperative. But it does help. So here's a maternity colony that they gated. And this was a shaft, vertical shaft that they gated. This isn't the gate off. What this is something like this. Vandalism. People think that there must be something special in there. They ask me, are there treasures in there? I said, no. And acetylene torch, they'll cut them. And just to gain access to it. So this game that government has to play between repairing them and the like. And just for what interesting happened here, this is in the Inyo National Forest in California, and this is about this, at the fairgrounds where they have the smoky bear exhibit they do in the county fairs and stuff, and they had a bat issue. I won't bore you with that. I helped them with it. So you notice that this was sponsored by the Forest Service, Bat Conservation International, and Texas A&M Wildlife and Fisheries. So we're getting a lot of love out in eastern California about Texas A&M. So that's the project that I'm putting a lot of my personal effort in, because that's a big area, and it takes pretty much constant effort to try and find these things. But it's also, and all the bat people I work with now tell me, it's also the largest project they know about for a species where you're pit tagging that much over that big of an area, and with 20 maternity colonies and all that. So I know, so that's the question you're all asking yourself right now, right? Well, so I just want to leave you with one more as we end. Not everything can end well. I know, just another thing just to give you a little good warm thought there. So I don't know, I just can't help myself. So anyway, that's all I had, and I appreciate you coming, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try and address them. Yes, sir.
So there's 3 bats in Texas, right, that they've got confirmed having
The fungus.
Yeah.
Yes.
But in any of those colonies, any of them hibernate, are they concerned about them actually suffering any mortalities?
Yeah. It's a good question. The tricolored bat, Perimyotis, it was a cave myotis. They have some concern there. The other one was a Townsend's. And they don't. So far in the east, this is the second time they've got what we call PD, because you don't want to be saying Pseudogemarascus structans all the time. PD, there was one, I think it was Virginia, the subspecies in Virginia or something for the Townsend spearbat had PD. This is the only other time they found Townsend's with it, but they've never seen white nose on it. But the tricolored bat is the one that they're most concerned about, because that gets it, and they will hibernate in pretty big clusters. So they're really afraid of it. And I think that might have something to do with it. They're deeper hibernators. Yeah. The hope in Texas is that, because and of course we're taking measurements on the cave or culvert or whatever environment. It's all about, it's got to be fairly cold. There's a temperature range. It's got to be pretty cold, and it's got to be humid for the fungus to be there. And so the hope is that since Texas tends to be warmer than a lot of places farther north, that most bats won't be going into hibernation deep enough and long enough to where that they'll get the white nose to kill them, a lot of them. Some
if they can get up and feed, it's probably going to make a difference.
What's that?
If they can wake up and it's warm out.
Exactly, exactly, that's right. And we think a lot of people, like in California, the Townsend spearbat bat on the west side of the Sierra does that. They will go into torpor for a while, but then come out and feed because it warms up. But on the east side, these high elevations, at 8, 9, 10,000 feet in the White Mountains, it doesn't ever warm up until March a little. So yeah, so the hope is that Texas won't get hit too bad, but what our goals now are to kind of outline where the PD is and watch the bats, and just really to kind of tell them how bad it's going to be, because there's, unfortunately, it's another one of those things like with the deer, chronic waste syndrome, that what are they going to do? So Yeah, it's a tough one. Yes, ma'am.
So with the golden chief warbler,
That thing, yeah.
so did they just not know that they were occupying all these other areas?
What happened, long story short, they were emergency listed in 1990 by the Fish and Wildlife Service based on saying there's only 15,000 of them, they're losing all their habitat. If you go back and look at the records from Hulich, he was kind of Mr. Golden Chief Warbler before, you knew that there were a lot of them down there in that southwest part of the range. They didn't talk about that. Let's just put it that way. They didn't talk about that. And so the emergency listed, they got listed, and now once something lists, it's hard to get them unlisted or downlisted, and that's not our goal anyway. Our goal is to give them the information. So, and D or down listings is more than just how many are out there process. But whether or not people knew or not, they certainly didn't know how many there were, and they certainly didn't realize the extent to which they were in areas and conditions, habitat, that people thought that they couldn't really occupy well. And it turns out they can very well. There's a wider range than this little narrow. So basically what our study says is actually the range of what they can occupy is that. Yeah, so yeah, it's a good question. And then we actually wrote a series of papers in the Wildlife Society Bulletin talking just about that, and basically said, conclusion was, yeah, they could have known if they wanted to know. I don't know how badly they wanted to know. When you emergency list something, it means that you think it's going to go extinct like tomorrow. And if they had stepped back and waited a little bit, they would have found out that it didn't need that, and from there on, it's all conspiracy theory. So, okay, I don't know.
And they have been genetically characterized. And
Yeah, yes, good. Actually, yeah, they've been genetically characterized by the people. It's one large population. Yeah, there's no metapopulation structure or anything like that. Yeah, good. That's a good thing I should have pointed out.
Just, you know, in the herp world, Mike, it's just, some of this happens sometimes because there are just not very many people that are good at going out and finding it.
And yeah, that's right. And as you know, you look and you will find in a situation like this. Like I said, like that's why I said to Dr. Mateos that it's the rest is conspiracy theory, and it is conspiracy theory because why would you emergency list something like that? One school of thought is, well, it's because there's some environmental community in Austin wanted them to use it to stop development in Austin. There is that element of people there because they told us that, okay? But what they have, I mean, there's no, it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, people that work for the county, yeah, you know, we use that to slow up TxDOT, we use that to slow up the developers, we extract the price. They tell you that. They're not going to put it in writing, but they tell you that. What are you going to do with that, right? And then there's the other people that I'm sure were very concerned and did think there weren't many of them. But like most of these endangered species, things you go out and look, and there's no reason ever to believe that there weren't more of them out there. And we have a pretty conservative estimate. So, and what's so funny about all this, not funny, it's frustrating. People say, well, you know, you're just doing this because you don't want them endangered species. Now, why would a faculty member not want something to be an endangered species? That's your meal ticket, right? So, I mean, it's kind of like, do you guys really know how we're funded here? You know? It must be that gold bar that showed up that's with TxDOT on it in my, you know, mailbox or something. But yeah, it's kind of frustrating. But yeah, funding is pretty much dried up for them because they know they know in their heart of hearts. And TPWD, who's managing them, they know. But it's of course a state endangered species too. But the feds rule the roost on that. And TPWD knows that there's a lot of them out there, and they're not going to put much of anything into it now because they know that there's no reason to.
So
Yes?
why is it being listed?
Why isn't it?
Yeah.
Politics. And we don't have anything to do with it. There was a petition went forward to the Fish and Wildlife Service by a group of people to ask it to be delisted, and the Fish and Wildlife Service denied it. And now it's going to go to court. And we don't have anything to do with that. I mean, I'm not, you know, involved with that. It's a group of people that is a very consortium of people that are doing that. The Fish and Wildlife Service, for listing a species, there's this 5-factor analysis they call it. I know you know that, where it's about, okay, the habitat, is there any kind of commercial use for them? Clearly not here. Is there some kind of disease? Is there, you know, there's 5 factors you have to look at. So clearly it's too. It's not just habitat. What's the trend? Okay, we did analyze the trend of all that too, and it's actually interesting. With populations are actually starting to move more into the cities along that I-35 corridor. And while some of the area out there is being fragmented by ranchettes and stuff, there's people, a lot of those smaller towns are actually shrinking, which is good for the bird, not good for the economy, but good for the bird. So the Fish and Wildlife Service just basically came back and said, well, other things could happen, you know, West Nile virus, something like that. So, and that brings up the whole thing, what's the Fish and Wildlife Service in Texas's perspective on this? You know, why don't they want to use this as a success story? I don't know. In my opinion, it should at least, unfortunately right now, it kind of bastardizes the definitions in the fish, in the Endangered Species Act, which weakens the Endangered Species Act and just gives ammunition to people to attack it. Because remember, in the Endangered Species Act, there's two listings. You're endangered or you're threatened. Endangered means you're endangered with extinction, hence emergency listing. Threatened means you're susceptible to becoming endangered. Well, clearly this bird with 200 is not at risk of extinction. The emergency listing was in error. You can argue then about should it be endangered. Clearly it should be threatened. Okay, at most. If it's threatened, that keeps you right there, and there are no differences in the law for protection of threatened or endangered. It's not like, well, they're threatened now, so I can go shoot a few. You can't do that. What it does, it means you're not the emphasis for us doing work anymore. So I don't know why people, I kind of figured that compromise would be, oh, make it threatened, but the problem is if it's just threatened, that still keeps, for people that want it off the list, and it should be, that makes it, it's still just as protected. So downlisting, a lot of people say, well, wouldn't downlisting be warranted? I said, yeah, it certainly is based on our information by what they call as their definitions. Taking it off the list is a big step, but the other thing about it is you can always put it back on. So, yeah. Other questions? Going once? Twice?
So.
Sold. Thank you all very much.